Nothing suffered or died for my plate for 20 years, and I'm very selfish because I love, that makes me feel so happy. I just think I'm vegan because I'm selfish. It's the only way to be, and gosh, I feel so lucky to be here on the stage, sharing a stage, even if it's just for 2 minutes, with these amazing speakers that have come all the way from Maryland today, where she's rushed around doing other talks. She's still got her California clothes on, she told me, so someone needs to give her a jacket if you see her looking cold. They're inspiring people all over the world, and they're here in London with us today at VegFest, and it's just really inspirational. So thank you to you. I hope you have this lovely bit of space, this amazing, inspirational Brenda Sanders. Sanders is the American accent. Brenda Sanders sounds much more cooler. But yeah, she's going to be amazing for us for the next hour. So I do like to have the loudest room in VegFest so everyone thinks, wow, what's going on? So please, will you just really give some VegFest love for this most beautiful lady that's travelled a very long way to be here with us. So can we go a bit wild? Yay, thank you. I love it, some walls and everything. Thank you very much. I'll hand you over now.
This is on too, right? Yes, okay. All right, so. Okay. So, again, I'm Brenda Sanders. I am a vegan activist. I do food justice work, and I just don't know what to, okay. I do food justice work, animal rights work in Baltimore City, in Maryland. And I have been, like she said, I have been vegan for the last 20 years. I just celebrated my 20-year vegan anniversary in June, so. And so today I'm gonna be talking about, okay, so I'm kind of on a speaking tour of sorts. It's not an official speaking tour, but people keep asking me to come out and talk, and I keep saying yes. So it's been like 3 talks in October, there's 3 more in November, and after that, who knows? But what that means is that I've been doing a lot of writing, I've been doing a lot of talking, and so when a friend of mine recently, a couple weeks ago, said that she looked at the program for UK VegFest, and she was like, I saw your title, and it was like so intense. And I was like, oh no, what was the, so I went back and I looked at the title, and I was like, wow, really? Comprehensive Intersectional Approach. I must have really been feeling very good about myself when I came up with that title. And so when I saw that, I decided to go back and make a correction. So I corrected it to a fairly thorough intersectional approach to vegan activism. So, all right, so a comprehensive approach. So I guess we should start with a definition. Has anybody actually looked into like what is intersectionality? What it means, anybody like already know? Wow, okay, cool. I just want to see if this works. So people know how the animal rights movement is currently using the term intersectionality. What you may not know, and what a lot of people don't know, is the origin of the term intersectional. And so I just want to give a little bit of background on that. So intersectionality was actually a term that was coined by the civil rights attorney Kimberly Crenshaw. And it was originally specifically supposed to address the issue that Black women were having within the justice system. So since Black women live at the intersection of race-based discrimination and sex-based, gender-based discrimination, we were falling through the cracks when it came to getting justice within the court systems. So for instance, say a Black woman, single mother, her employers found out that she was pregnant and they fired her. She felt like she was fired because she was a Black woman, that they found out was gonna be a single mother and maybe felt like she wasn't the best person for the job anymore. So when she would go into court, Kimberly Crenshaw had all these civil rights cases where black women would go into court and say, you know, I was discriminated against because I'm black. And then the defense would say, well, but black men aren't having this kind of discrimination, so that would invalidate their case. Or if they were saying, I'm, you know, being discriminated against because I'm a woman, they would say, well, white women aren't suffering in the same way, and so it would, again, invalidate their case. And so black women were falling through the cracks over and over again because we don't really fit into one or the other. We don't, we're not completely in the race box, and we're not completely in the gender box. We sort of are in this weird no man's land that, legally speaking, we were not receiving justice. And so Kimberly Crenshaw came up with this concept of intersectionality that could sort of give a framework for what black women were dealing with and what we, how we were being left behind with the justice system. So of course, like many things that are created for the benefit of black women, it was taken and co-opted to sort of mean something completely different that completely erased, well, not completely, but sort of erased black women from the original meaning. And so now it's being used by the social justice movements, and it's fine, you know, it happens. But now it's being used in, you know, the anti-racist movement, the feminist movement, the, you know, LGBTQ plus rights movements, the disability rights movements, to build solidarity between movements, which is important and is great. And so now a teeny tiny number of AR activists are actually trying to push forth this idea of an understanding of the intersections of oppression and how that can play out in animal rights work. And so this is the definition that's currently being used: the interconnected nature of social, categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and independent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So, it's really important that these conversations about intersectionality are starting to be had within the animal rights movement. And we need a lot more people talking about it. We need a lot more people engaged in shifting the way that they are doing their activism. And that's for what I came up with as two very important reasons. Number one, since all forms of oppression are rooted in the devaluing of life, it's illogical for justice activists to fight against one form of oppression while completely ignoring other forms of oppression. It just doesn't make sense. And two, if the animals have any chance of being free from oppression, they need more than just white people advocating for them. When I started doing animal rights advocacy, and it hasn't been that long, I was vegan for a very long time, but I wasn't active until actually the last few years. And when I first started coming around animal rights, the animal rights movement and animal rights activists, I noticed that there was this ongoing debate that was really confusing to me. It was whether or not AR activists should be for the animals and only focus on the animals. And so my brain literally couldn't process what this debate was about. I just couldn't understand it. And so I figured, I must be missing something, or I'm not processing something well. And I saw these battles were raging where the animal activists who were for the animals were trying to silence the activists who were bringing up conversations about human oppression. And they were using reasons like the animals are the most oppressed group on the planet, and humans can speak for themselves, and animals have no voice. And again, I was like, okay, but what is the debate? What is the issue? And so I finally, at some point, it clicked, and I understood. And I saw that, the vast majority of the people who were objecting to having these conversations about human oppression were people who were not suffering from systemic oppression in their own daily lives. And so when you're black, when you're gay, when you're trans, when you have a disability, or any other, you're a part of any other truly marginalized group, you're disadvantaged at a systemic level, and you literally don't have the luxury of not bringing human issues into the animal rights movement. It's like you are an actual human issue, And so fighting against when people say to you, keep these human issues out of the animal rights movement, they're literally saying keep yourself out of the animal rights movement. And I've actually had people, when I've been talking, in these different discussions within the animal rights movement, talking about these human issues of oppression, I've had people say to me, you don't belong in our movement because you're bringing these human issues into the discussion. But for me, I can't not push back against like racist institutions that are trying to systematically disadvantage me. I can't not fight against that because that's like my everyday life. And so, doing intersectional vegan activism is not even a choice for me, it's just my reality. And for a lot of other people who are trying to do this work and getting all this pushback from the mainstream, very, very white animal rights movement, it's like it creates this situation where you want to do this work, you want to advocate for animals, but like you're trying to sort of straddle a fence because you have to push back against your own oppression, but you also want to do this work for animals. But within the mainstream animal rights movement, there's this pushback against the very nature of who you are. And so that's been an issue that a lot of animal rights activists of color and who belong to other extremely marginalized groups have been having. Which brings me to the other reason. The animal rights movement is very, 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 very white, right? So, and hopefully I don't have to point out why, okay, I will. Because usually I do. So one would have to agree that it would be much easier for one to completely devote oneself to the issues of animal rights if one is not also on a daily basis feeling, the push of oppression within their own personal lives, right? And so it kind of only, some people have come to the conclusion that, other groups of people just don't care about animals as much as we do. Come on, that's just not the case. It's just that it's a different, people who are in these marginalized populations, we have a completely different experience of the world, and that has to be taken into consideration. So, if people who are members of marginalized populations are engrossed in their own justice struggles, and therefore not actively engaged in animal rights, does that mean that the animal rights movement is doomed to never attract the masses of people that we would need in order to push this movement forward and be successful? And that's a great question. I would say not necessarily. As a person myself who at one time did not give one single thought to animals at all, and who now spends the majority of my time advocating for animals as well as, marginalized human populations, I can say that it's completely possible for this movement to connect with people about animal rights, but that connection needs to be made with the full acknowledgement that people in marginalized groups are experiencing their own oppression every day. So the typical white-centric way of dealing with issues of animal rights will have to be set aside for the greater good of the animals that we say that we're advocating for. So before I go into more detail about that, I want to be clear about something. I'm just going to read this because it's something that I feel and I've been expressing in online forums and stuff, and been getting a pretty good reaction to it, but also some pushback as well. The animal rights movement is an ally-led movement. So it's our responsibility as allies to the animals to communicate to other humans on the animals' behalf. Animal rights activists therefore have a responsibility to do the most effective outreach possible. Being an ally to an oppressed group is not about your ego. It's not about being right. It's not about being able to one-up somebody in a debate or an argument. Being an ally to those in vulnerable populations is about using the best, most effective strategies available to reach as many potential allies as possible in order to address the injustice being perpetrated on the oppressed individuals. Does that make sense? Okay. So if we agree that animals need more than just a small number of white people in order, advocating for them in order to get out of their current situation, and we agree that we need to be doing the most effective form of activism possible to reach as many potential allies as we can, and we acknowledge that humans at this very moment are also experiencing oppression and that their struggles are important, then there are some very simple basic rules that animal activists can follow in order to be more intersectional in their vegan advocacy. So I came up with some rules. Acknowledge the importance of other justice struggles. So I'm sure we would all agree that all kinds of exploitation are heinous, that they need to be eradicated, right? All of them? Yeah, no, yeah, okay. So it's time to acknowledge that, creating this hierarchy of oppression is really counterproductive to pit animal oppression against human oppression, and to push forward this idea that since animals are the most exploited, most heinously abused beings on the planet, that somehow all the other forms of oppression don't matter at all is really, really damaging and counterproductive. Especially since this is the exact kind of reasoning that other people who we're advocating to are using to invalidate animals' right to be free from human oppression. So we don't want to be hypocritical and say to them, oh, how dare you, not think that animal oppression is important, that's so human supremacist, but then turn right back around and say, the animals are the only ones that matter, and, who cares about it just doesn't make sense. So, number 2, stay away from triggering language. So, there's this whole debate right now about political correctness and, all this sort of people are really irritated with other people's feelings being hurt, basically, with other people's reactions to things that they feel are damaging. And so we have this concept of like trigger words and, this thing was triggering to me. And a lot of people are just, they're very privileged people who, maybe don't have to deal with or haven't had, trauma, like deep-seated trauma experiences, and so maybe they've never been triggered. Maybe, they don't understand the effect of having your trauma and the feelings, the psychological damage and the emotional damage brought back up through, seeing an image or hearing, something, and all of the ickiness that brings. I'm not a psychologist, but I have experienced a few different kinds of like deep trauma. And so I understand that different people respond to their trauma differently. For some people, they go through it, they move past it, they're good. For other people, it can be debilitating. And so we have to understand that different people are different, that, we need to accommodate the whole range of experiences and reactions to trauma. So I just want to take the example of using the word rape to describe what happens to cows in the dairy industry. Now, there are a lot of people who've been the victim of sexual violence or sexual abuse who are feeling very, very uncomfortable hearing over and over and over again how cows are raped, rape. And so they say things like, this language was very triggering for me. And then you have animal rights activists who are just very adamant about being able to use this language. You have people, well, that's what it is. It's rape. Why just call it what it is? And so they're insisting on using this language that folks are having this negative reaction to because they are determined to be right. And as far as I'm concerned, when I see these debates raging on social media or, even in person, the only thing that comes to my mind is that for the folks who are saying, you know, well, I should be able to use whatever language I want and you can't stop me, and, you know, that it seems more about ego. It seems more about your own personal desire to win than it is about your desire to do the most effective activism possible. Because if somebody is saying, you know, using the word rape is triggering for me, what they're actually saying is that the psychological and emotional damage that I have is throwing up a roadblock to me being able to receive what you're saying to me right now. So please don't say that, say something else. And when you think about it like that, it's like, well, yeah, you know, I could call it something else. I could express it in a different way. But when you feel like you need to be right, rather than needing to do the best, most effective activism for animals, then you're putting yourself before animals. And again, ally movement. We are not advocating to sheep and cows and camels. Like, we're advocating to human beings. So if you have this stance that's like, well, I don't care about human feelings. Okay, so on the one hand, like, you don't care about humans and their feelings, and on the other hand, you want to convince those same humans that you don't give a crap about to listen to you about the situation that animals are in, and that doesn't make sense. Avoid oppression comparisons, especially if you don't belong to the oppressed group, which you're comparing to animal oppression. This is another case where people from dominant oppressor groups are being completely oblivious to the lived experiences of marginalized populations. And they're saying things that those marginalized people find completely offensive, and then they're like, I don't see why that was offensive. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're not having the lived experience of having, you know, that kind of, whatever that kind of oppression is. And so, of course, you don't see why what you just said was offensive, but what you can do is just say, okay, I believe you that what I just said or what I just did was offensive. Now, how can we fix this? Take, for instance, and this is just like a trigger warning because, you know, this can be offensive. Take, for instance, when people within the animal rights movement continue to compare the atrocities committed against Black people to the exploitation of animals. Now, when AR activists insist on doing this, they're obviously trying to make the point that, you know, when these awful things were done to Black people, they were heinous. And so, therefore, you know, you should understand that when they're done to animals, they're heinous. So, I mean, it's a valid point, but what the people who are spreading these kinds of images don't understand is that, number one, for people who come from a heritage of enslavement, dehumanization, systemic inequality, and who carry the genetic trauma of this, as well as still being subjected to oppressive systems today, seeing these images can cause real psychological and emotional trauma. I know for me, seeing these images, it hurts. Like, it hurts me emotionally to keep seeing PETA and whoever else, you know, putting these images out there and trying to make these comparisons supposedly for the animals. But, you know, if you're not a person who comes from this heritage of enslavement, and if you're not somebody who's currently suffering from this type of oppression, like just modern day systemic oppression and discrimination, you would not understand what somebody who is in that situation is feeling. But you could just listen to what they're saying and believe that is true, instead of, again, coming from a place of ego. Well, what's wrong with being, you know, compared to animals? What's the problem with that? Animals are great. Which brings me to the second point. Black people have historically been and continue to be compared to animals as a way to dehumanize and humiliate us. Many, many, many of us, it started, you know, in childhood, you know, being called a monkey or being, you know, whatever animal. And so this kind of stuff, it causes damage. It leaves scars. And so when you're like trying to do this advocacy work, which is beautiful, it's beautiful to be someone who has made the connection with, you know, the other animals and wants to not only just do something different in your own life, to not contribute to this abuse and exploitation of animals, but also to go out there and try to do something about it, and especially as someone from a marginalized group, because what people may not know is, for Black folks and gay folks and, disabled folks, when we go out and advocate for animals, we get a lot of crap from our own communities. Because, like, for me, I do food justice work and social justice work in Baltimore, Maryland. I march in the streets for Black Lives Matter. I'm very active in the social justice, food justice community. And so whenever I talk about animals, I get crap for it. It's like, what? Animals? Like, we're out here getting shot in the streets and you're talking about animals? And it's like, I can't not care about animals. I can't, like, go back to when I didn't care about animals. And I'm a doer. I'm somebody who, if I see some kind of injustice, I have to single-handedly fix it myself, And so I can't not work for this extremely vulnerable and marginalized community. And so, I get all of this anger from folks within the social justice movement, but then, on the animal rights side, I'm getting all this pushback, like, keep that race stuff out of our movement. And, so it's really difficult to sort of, straddle that fence and do this work. And so when we're saying, like, these comparisons are damaging to us, that they're hurtful to us, that should be listened to and taken into consideration. And again, put that ego that, you shouldn't be upset by this. What's there to be upset? We are, and we don't like it, and just stop. So that's that. All too often, when this kind of imagery is used and is brought to marginalized communities, and there's also, like, a lot of stuff around rape, a lot of imagery that's out there around rape and, like, comparing the rape of women and sexual abuse of women to the sexual manipulation and awfulness that's being done with cows in the dairy industry. And so a lot of times women, within the feminist movement or whatever, we're saying, like, feminism is an animal rights issue. But then we go and we use this imagery that is, like, very upsetting to these people who've been the victims of sexual assault. And then we're like, well, what do you mean you hate vegans? Like, what do you mean you don't want anything to do with the animal rights movement? Instead of just listening to what people are saying, because they're literally saying to you, please do this a different way so that I can cope with it, so that I can deal with what it is that you're trying to say to me. And again, it's about doing the most effective activism possible. All right. I actually, I shortened this presentation. Usually my presentations are super long, and I run over and people have to kick me off the stage. But I wanted to give folks an opportunity to ask questions, so, like, get your questions ready. I'm ready, even if you're angry and you're, like, down with intersectionality, whatever, we'll talk about it. But I just wanted to let you guys know that it's not much longer. Okay, so, and finally, show true solidarity with other people's fights against injustice. So avoid doing solidarity work because of the possibility that, like, if I show up at the march, then maybe people will come to my vegan potluck. Like do actual solidarity work because it's the right thing to do. It makes you a better person to say, you know what, this is my cause. I am focused on the cause of animal rights, but, what's happening with, like, people with mental illness being extremely discriminated against, it's messed up. I want to come and stand in solidarity with you. Because, it makes you a better person, which is what vegans declare to be, like, the reality, that we are, like, the best people. We are, hands down, of all the people on the planet, vegans are the best people. So, act like it. Because the more that we, as animal rights activists embody that, intersectional way of engaging with justice, the more we'll be sort of invited into the wider justice movement, which is what we need. We, like, the animal rights movement is like the one movement that's not included in all the other. I mean, I've done work with like the trans rights movement, sex worker rights movement, and like there's solidarity. Like there's this idea that, my issue matters and so does yours and so does yours, indigenous rights, and it's like the animal rights movement is the one that's like over to the side, like it's just about the animals, and it's just gonna continue to be a very small and possibly insignificant movement if we don't join the greater justice movement. And animal rights is a justice issue. I did not get into animal rights because I love animals. I don't understand them. They do things that with the hump in the leg and I don't know what that's about with cats, and it's like, I like you, I hate you, I like you. Which one is it, So it's not like, for me, I don't have any particular affinity to any animal. I just respect their right to live free on the planet. That's a justice issue. And the more we start to see it as a justice issue, we'll start to sort of incorporate ourselves into the larger justice issue. And then the other social justice movements will take us more seriously, because we're like not over here on the side, like on our moral high ground, pointing down at everybody and saying you're all terrible, which nobody wants to hear. So, before I close, I would like to point out that, I bashed the animal rights movement a little bit, but there are organizations that are doing this intersectional work, and I always try to sort of uplift those folks who are really engaged in sort of this groundbreaking work and have been, way before this whole concept of intersectionality even entered into the conversations within the animal rights movement. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Food Empowerment Project and Lauren Ornelas, and just read about, I just really literally pulled this off the website. Food Empowerment Project seeks to create a more just and sustainable world by recognizing the power of one's food choices. They encourage choices that reflect a more compassionate society by spotlighting the abuse of animals on farms, the depletion of natural resources, unfair working conditions for produce workers, the unavailability of healthy foods in communities of color and low-income areas, and the importance of not purchasing chocolate that comes from the worst forms of child labor. So that is amazing work, and I just wanted to spotlight that, as well as A Well-Fed World. Is Dawn in the audience? Hey, Dawn. Okay. So A Well-Fed World is a hunger relief and animal protection organization chipping away at two of the world's most immense, unnecessary, and unconscionable forms of suffering: the suffering of people hungry from lack of food and the suffering of animals used and abused for food. They have a positive, practical, and action-led approach that produces immediate assistance for those in need and structural change for lasting results. In addition to their direct programs, they raise funds, partner with, and promote innovative, highly effective projects that strengthen plant-based feeding and farming programs, farm animal care and rescue efforts, and vegan advocacy and community building. And I can say that A Well-Fed World has been a huge supporter of the work that we're doing in Baltimore, which I will actually talk about in length in the next talk that I do. We're doing a lot of really exciting vegan advocacy in Baltimore, Maryland, in the States right now. And A Well-Fed World has been such a huge supporter and believer in the work that we're currently doing. And I mean, there's been a groundswell. We really are pushing the vegan movement forward in Baltimore in a way that, I don't want to brag, but it's really not being done in very many places. So it's very exciting. Collectively Free is an activist community that works towards total animal liberation through anti-speciesist messaging, highly creative nonviolent actions, and pro-intersectional empowering community building. And I'm good friends with some of the Collectively Free folk, one of whom is Rafaela, who did a talk yesterday and I think is doing another talk today. And So I recently started working with an organization called Vegan Outreach. I had heard about Vegan Outreach before, and that they were big on like leafleting, and that just really isn't my thing. I'm not saying that leafleting is not amazing, but I'm more of a like in the community, talking to people, connecting with people, and following up with people kind of person, and so. Like vegan outreach wasn't even on my radar for the longest time until recently I heard that they were starting this community engagement initiative where they're actually, I'll just read it. They seek a future when sentient animals are no longer exploited as commodities. They've recently launched a community engagement initiative to connect with, amplify, and give support to community-based activism projects in marginalized communities, like the work I'm currently engaged in Baltimore, as a way of bridging the gap between the mainstream animal rights movement and the important work happening at the community level. And it's been great. Folks have been so supportive, financially supportive, both at A Welfare World as well as at VO, Vegan Outreach, of the really expensive programs that we're doing in Baltimore right now. Free programs to marginalized communities to spread information about veganism. So to close out, I want to say it's so important that these connections continue to be made from the AR movement to these other social justice movements. Because again, I'm gonna say we are an ally-led, the reason why I keep saying this is because sometimes you talk to animal rights folks and it seems like they think they're the oppressed group. They're like, and vegans are the most oppressed group and it's like, no, we're allies to the most oppressed group on the planet. And so it's really, for some people, I think it's really hard to stay focused on the fact that we're working for someone else. But we need to do the most effective forms of advocacy and outreach possible. And so, as far as I'm concerned, having this intersectional vegan approach to activism is really the only way to accomplish that goal. So, thank you. Thank you. So if anybody has any questions, I have a microphone. Does somebody want to pass around the microphone? There was somebody who was supposed to do that? No? Okay, cool. Okay, all right. Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much for your talk. Really appreciate it.
I'm sorry, who is it?
Hi.
Okay, hey.
What I struggle with is trying to tell people how they can understand the other side. Like, for example, had a flatmate, she's on animal rights movement, and she posted something on Facebook that she offended her boyfriend. And I was trying to explain to her why she offended. Basically, she is white and she's dating a black guy. And on her post, she was saying, animals are not for humans, nor women are for men, and nor black people are for white people. And obviously, that offends a black person. And I was trying to explain why, and she couldn't understand why. And I feel like sometimes it's easier to just ignore than to call out people, because sometimes it just seems like so difficult to educate them about these issues. What do you think? How should we communicate that side?
Yeah. So personally, I never ignore anything. Like, but it's easy for me. Like, I can be very confrontational, and sometimes it's fun for me. So I don't have a problem like calling people out, confronting people. I mean, be kind. We're vegans, we're compassionate and kind and all of that. So there's a way of calling folks out on their ignorance, and it's just ignorance. I mean, I believe that there's a small number of really awful, racist, like, nasty people. And then everybody else, everybody else who's in this privileged position, and they just never have to think about race, they never have to think about oppression because they're not the ones who are the victims of it. They just don't know. And so I would say that for folks who are in a position of privilege, who never have to deal with systemic oppression, just listen, listen to people and believe them when they say it, because you may never ever get it. You may never get it. And more than likely you won't ever get it. But you can believe people when they say this is oppressive, this is offensive, please don't do this. Because if anybody would know if something is oppressive, it's the people who are affected by the oppression itself. And so again, I would say, tell people, one of the things that there's this one image that's like speciesism is racism is sexism. And that one, that image, it just really irks me. Do you say irk here? Like irritates the hell out of me because, those things are inherently different. They are different. They involve different folks. They involve different systems. It's just different. They're not all the same. And we need to understand not that other forms of oppression are more or less important, but that each one is individual and it's different. And so we need to understand and acknowledge that. So, to say that, I know the one quote that you're talking about, just like women are not for men and blacks are not for whites, animals are not for our use or something like that. We just need to get rid of all of that. And I think the reason that people use these comparisons is because they think like, if I could just get people to relate animal oppression.
That's what you said. She said, I'm just being provocative. I'm just being provocative. If I can provoke people, they will pay attention to my message. And I don't think, like you said, is not the effective way to do that. Because a person that being oppressed will shut down to whatever message that she's trying to say, right?
Exactly. Being provocative, saying things that have shock value. It's really fun if you're a jerk, but, it's not fun for the person who's being shocked, who's being provoked. It's not fun, and it's counterproductive. So if you think that, if I could just get people upset enough that they'll pay attention, you're gonna get the wrong response. And maybe that's the problem with the animal rights movement all this time. And like PETA's, and some organizations who, use these shock tactics to try to shake people up, and yet every single person I have ever met who isn't vegan hates PETA. I've never met a non-vegan who doesn't hate PETA. So, using your common sense, like it would tell you maybe, that's not quite the way to go. So yeah, it's about doing the most, I'm just gonna keep saying this, the most effective advocacy possible. Next.
Hello, thank you so much for speaking. It's so great to hear you. Sure. My question is about language, discourse, labels that different activist groups use, like, for example, the term vegan. And I'd like your opinion on if you think terminology and how we speak about different movements needs to change in order to have effective activism as we move into sort of intersectionality. And whether you think, for example, I know the term vegan is specifically derived from the animal rights movement. So some could see being an intersectional vegan as like a contradictory term, and whether you think there's space or a possible evolution of language that's needed to truly integrate activists in intersectionality. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. I'm one of those activists who's like, I am just gonna embrace the word vegan. I'm gonna embrace the concept of veganism, and for better or worse, that's just who I am and where I am at this point. And it's kind of easy for me maybe not so much for other folks, because I work in extremely marginalized communities. And so I go into communities and they haven't even heard of vegan. So I can basically frame it in whatever way is most comfortable for me. Whereas, if you're going into communities and speaking with people who've already heard of veganism, who may already have a negative opinion of it, or have had a bad experience with it, or just doesn't like it for whatever reason, then it could be more difficult, and it can sometimes even make you feel like, should I even be pushing veganism, And I think that is a part of the reason why so many folks are starting to move in the direction of, go veg, and like these other ways of softening the vegan messaging, so as not to turn people off. What it does in my work is it gives a framework through which to understand the lifestyle that I'm promoting. So like if we didn't call it veganism, or if we didn't frame it in that way, then we would need to get another structure to plug in immediately, because people need structure. They really do. It's like you give them this information and like, okay, what do I do? How do I do it? What are the rules? And that's the experience that I've been having with our work in Baltimore is, we expose people to this completely new information. People just don't even understand that their food is connected to animals at all. And it's weird because it's literally called a thigh. It's literally, it's a leg, but this culture, the mainstream culture just does so much to disconnect people from the animals. That people aren't even making these connections, that dairy is milk, breast milk from a lactating mother. I say this and people are like, whoa, wait, I don't like that, and so I think that if we were going to move away from veganism and like create something new and inclusive of, then we would need to do that immediately, first of all, and it would have to still be a framework that people can work through. So, but for me, I'm pro-vegan. I believe in promoting it as a lifestyle option. So.
Hi, thanks for speaking, by the way. You're really smart. Oh. It's really nice. Sorry. This kind of follows on from the question that was asked first. When it comes to intersectionality, the thing that I found difficult is that sometimes I'll speak to somebody who is like pioneering a different movement, or sometimes it'll be somebody who's in the gay rights movement, or somebody in the anti-sex slavery movement, for instance. And the trouble that I get is sometimes it's not really for me to say, hey, I want to be intersectional about this, because they'll say to me, like, I'm sorry, but there are human women being abused, and you're telling me that that's as important as a chicken? Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not that I don't think women being abused is important, and I also think that's important. I think that's obviously what you're saying, is if you go along to these things, you're showing, like, I think all these things are important. But I guess it's what I find hard is trying to get across to them that we should be included, that like animals should be included in their group, not just them included in my group of things I care about, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And so it seems almost like you've kind of got to win the battle already before you can even start being intersectional, because you've got to convince the people who you're being inter with that you're worthy of being inter with. How do you go about doing that in an effective way? How have you found your experience in communicating that as something that should be part of that movement and not just kind of like, maybe that's not as important as us kind of thing?
Yeah, ooh. Yeah, that one is tough, and it just takes tact. So first of all, when I'm going and standing in solidarity with another movement, I'm not going as an animal rights activist. I'm going as someone who cares about that cause. So it's not like I'm going to go there and at some point I'm going to figure out how to work the animals. No, I'm just there because, you know, indigenous people deserve rights, or, you know, whoever. And so, but one of the things I have found that I've been able to do, and it seems like an ulterior motive, and I hate the thought of having ulterior motives going into another social justice movement and being in solidarity with them. But one of the things I have been able to do is offer to bring the food, you know? Because a lot of times when they're having these meetings or having these marches or having these, you know, conventions or whatever, I personally am lucky enough to be affiliated with a vegan food collective in Baltimore, and we produce vegan food products. And so what I've been able to do in doing solidarity work is saying, oh, wait, no, don't worry about it. We'll handle the food. And then when we bring the food, there's also literature that, you know, connects the issues, or there's literature about why is the food vegan? And then, you know, and so people pick up the literature, they read it, they're like, oh, you know, and it's not like I am overtly pushing another agenda in their space, but I'm not gonna eat your food. You know, I feel uncomfortable with your food. So please allow me to contribute that to the cause. And we've done that on several different occasions. As soon as I leave here, I had to actually shorten my trip here because our collective was invited to come out and cater a green church event. So it's a bunch of churches who are trying to push, you know, the information about climate change and trying to be more green. One of the organizers of the event, I've been like really stalking her for like over a year and just being like, hey, if there's anything, you ever need a caterer, you know, so finally she took me up on it recently, and she was like, you know, it's gonna be this many people, and we wanted to know if you could like do breakfast. And I'm like, yes, you know. And so I had to cut this short because on Tuesday, we have this big event, and we will have much literature and a lot of information, and I'm even going to have an opportunity to get on the stage and talk for 5 whole minutes about, you know, our cause, about veganism and the connection between veganism and the planet. So I have been pursuing this for over a year, you know, and just having to kind of like wait for her to engage.
So
and
slow
now,
and steady, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So really just, you know, your sincerity about being in solidarity with whatever their cause is, it's gonna shine through. It is, and that I think will be the thing that opens people up. Not that you're coming in with the hammer and saying, you know, believe in this, you add this to the things that you think are important. So hopefully that helped. Anybody else? Am I out of time?
Your time.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Time flies when you're having fun.
All right, so thank you everybody. I wasn't even expecting this many people, so thank you for coming out, and yeah.
I think we can just be a little bit louder. I do like to have the loudest room. She's come all the way from America. Lovely Brenda Sanders, thank you so much.